What happens when a beloved country music superstar sits down for what should be a simple morning interview, only to find herself facing a host who seems more interested in stirring controversy than having a genuine conversation? In just 26 seconds, a routine appearance on Good Morning America transformed into one of the most shocking confrontations in morning television history. This is the story of how Sam Champion's relentless provocations pushed Faith Hill to her breaking point, resulting in an explosive exit that no one saw coming. It started like any other Tuesday morning at the Good Morning America studios in Times Square. The lights were bright, the cameras were rolling, and Faith Hill walked onto the set with her signature warm smile. She was there to talk about her new music, her upcoming tour, and to connect with fans who had supported her throughout her career. Robin Roberts sat to her left. George Stephanopoulos was positioned across the desk, and Sam Champion occupied the seat directly facing Faith. The set felt cozy, almost intimate, with its familiar arrangement of couches and coffee mugs that millions of viewers had come to know and love. The interview began pleasantly enough. Robin opened with a softball question about Faith's latest album, and Faith responded with enthusiasm, talking about the creative process and how much she loved returning to her roots. George chimed in with a question about balancing family life with a demanding career, and Faith answered gracefully, sharing anecdotes about her children and the importance of maintaining normalcy at home. For the first few minutes, everything seemed perfectly scripted, exactly what viewers expected from a morning show interview. But then Sam Champion leaned forward, and the energy in the room shifted. His expression changed from the warm, welcoming demeanor of a morning show host to something more calculating, more predatory. He cleared his throat and said, "Faith, I think we need to address the elephant in the room." Faith looked at him with a slightly confused expression, still smiling, still expecting a legitimate question. "What's that, Sam?" she asked politely. Sam paused for dramatic effect, letting the silence hang in the air for just a moment too long. "Your recent weight gain. A lot of people have been talking about it. How do you respond to the critics who say you've let yourself go?" The question landed like a bomb in the middle of the cheerful morning show set. Robin's head snapped toward Sam, her eyes wide with shock. George shifted uncomfortably in his seat, clearly not expecting this line of questioning. Faith's smile faltered, but she maintained her composure, taking a breath before responding. "I'm sorry. What did you just ask me?" Faith said, her voice steady, but carrying an edge that hadn't been there moments before. She wanted to give Sam a chance to walk it back, to clarify that perhaps she had misheard him. But Sam didn't back down. Instead, he doubled down with a condescending smile that made it clear he knew exactly what he was doing. "Your weight, Faith. You've clearly put on some pounds since your last tour. Don't you think you owe it to your fans to maintain a certain image? After all, they're the ones buying the tickets." The studio fell silent. Even the crew members behind the cameras stopped moving. This wasn't a question. This was an attack, and everyone in the room knew it. Faith's expression hardened, her jaw tightening as she processed what she had just heard. Robin immediately tried to intervene, her voice cutting through the tension. "Sam, I don't think that's an appropriate question for our guest." But Sam waved her off dismissively, his eyes never leaving Faith's face. "Oh, come on, Robin. We're all adults here. Faith's a public figure. These are the questions people want answered." Faith took another breath, clearly trying to maintain her professionalism in a situation that had become deeply uncomfortable. "Sam, I came here to talk about my music, not to be body shamed on national television," she said, her voice calm but firm. "I'm healthy. I'm happy. And I don't feel the need to justify my appearance to you or anyone else." It was a perfect response, measured and dignified, the kind of answer that should have ended the discussion right there. But Sam wasn't finished. "Body shamed?" Sam said with a mocking laugh that echoed through the studio. I'm just asking the questions that everyone else is thinking. You're in the entertainment industry, Faith. Your appearance is part of the package. If you can't handle that reality, maybe you should reconsider your career choice." George immediately jumped in, his voice sharp and authoritative. "Sam, that's enough. This is completely out of line." But the damage was already done. The mask had slipped, and everyone could see exactly who Sam Champion really was in that moment. Faith's eyes flashed with anger, and her professional veneer began to crack. "Excuse me?" she said, her voice rising slightly. "Are you seriously suggesting that my worth as an artist is determined by my dress size? That the music I create, the performances I give, the connection I have with my fans, all of that means nothing if I don't meet some arbitrary standard of physical perfection that you've decided upon?" The passion in her voice was undeniable, and it was clear that she was no longer willing to play nice with someone who had shown such blatant disrespect. Sam leaned back in his chair, a smug expression on his face, as if he were enjoying the conflict he had created. "I'm not suggesting anything, Faith. I'm simply pointing out what's obvious to everyone watching. You're not the same woman you were 10 years ago. Maybe if you spent less time making excuses and more time in the gym, you wouldn't have to get so defensive." The audacity of his words hung in the air like poison. Robin's mouth dropped open in disbelief. George looked like he wanted to reach across the desk and physically remove Sam from the set. Faith stood up abruptly, her microphone still clipped to her jacket. The sudden movement caught everyone off guard. "You know what, Sam?" she said, her voice steady and strong despite the obvious anger coursing through her. "I've been in this industry for over 20 years. I've sold millions of albums, won countless awards, and built a career based on talent and hard work. And in all that time, I've never encountered someone as small-minded and cruel as you." Her words cut through the studio with precision, each syllable landing with the weight of absolute truth. Sam's smug expression faltered for just a moment, a flicker of uncertainty crossing his face. But his ego wouldn't let him back down. "Small-minded," he scoffed. "I'm trying to have an honest conversation here. Maybe if more people were willing to tell you the truth, you wouldn't be in this situation." His words dripped with condescension, as if he genuinely believed he was doing Faith some kind of favor by humiliating her on national television. Robin stood up as well, moving to Faith's side in a clear show of support. "Sam, you need to apologize right now," she said firmly, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had been in the business long enough to know when a line had been crossed. But Sam just shook his head, that infuriating smirk still playing at the corners of his mouth. "Apologize for what? For asking legitimate questions? For refusing to pretend that appearance doesn't matter in the entertainment industry? I don't think so." Faith unclipped her microphone and placed it deliberately on the coffee table between them. The gesture was calm, controlled, but carried enormous weight. "I'm done here," she said simply, her voice cutting through the chaos like a knife. "I will not sit here and allow myself to be disrespected by someone who clearly has no understanding of basic human decency." She began to walk toward the edge of the set, her head held high, her dignity intact despite everything that had just transpired. George stood up as well, calling out to Faith. "Faith, please, we're so sorry. This is not representative of Good Morning America or how we treat our guests." His voice was sincere, genuinely apologetic, trying to salvage something from the wreckage of what had become a complete disaster. But Faith just shook her head, a sad smile on her face. "I appreciate that, George, but I can't stay here. Not after this." Sam, still sitting in his chair, called out with that same dismissive tone that had started this entire mess. "Oh, come on, Faith. Don't be so sensitive. If you can't take the heat, get out of the kitchen." It was perhaps the worst thing he could have said in that moment, the final straw that sealed his fate as the villain of this story. Faith stopped walking and turned back to face him, her eyes blazing with controlled fury. "Sensitive?" Faith repeated, her voice dangerously quiet. "You think standing up for myself, refusing to be bullied on national television makes me sensitive? No, Sam. What you call sensitivity, I call self-respect. Something you clearly know nothing about. Her words resonated through the studio, and even some of the crew members nodded in agreement. She had struck a chord with everyone who had ever been made to feel small by someone in a position of power. Robin stepped forward, positioning herself between Faith and Sam, as if physically blocking any further interaction between them. Faith is absolutely right, Robin said, her voice steady and strong. And Sam, you owe her an apology. What you said was inappropriate, unprofessional, and frankly disgusting. The conviction in Robin's voice made it clear that she was willing to risk her own position to stand up for what was right, to defend a guest who had been treated so poorly. But Sam still refused to back down. His face had turned red. Whether from embarrassment or anger, it was hard to tell. I don't owe anyone anything, he said defensively. I was doing my job. If she can't handle tough questions, maybe she shouldn't be doing interviews. The entitlement in his voice was staggering, the complete inability to recognize that he had done anything wrong. It was clear that in his mind, he was the victim here, being attacked for simply telling the truth. George moved toward Sam, his expression stern. That wasn't a tough question, Sam. That was a personal attack. There's a difference, and you know it. The authority in George's voice left no room for argument, but Sam was beyond reason at this point. He stood up from his chair, his movements jerky and agitated. I can't believe this, he said, his voice rising. I'm being attacked for asking the questions everyone wants to know the answers to. Faith had heard enough. She turned to face Sam one final time, and when she spoke, her voice carried the weight of someone who had finally reached their limit. No, Sam, you're not being attacked for asking questions. You're being called out for being cruel, for using your platform to tear someone down instead of building them up, for forgetting that behind every public figure is a real person with real feelings. Her words hung in the air, a perfect encapsulation of everything that had gone wrong in the past few minutes. The studio audience, which had been silent throughout most of this exchange, suddenly erupted in applause. The sound was thunderous, overwhelming, a clear indication of where their sympathies lay. Sam looked around, seemingly shocked that people weren't taking his side, that they weren't agreeing with his assessment of the situation. His face grew even redder, and for the first time, he seemed to realize that he had miscalculated badly. Robin took Faith's hand, squeezing it gently in a gesture of solidarity and support. We are so incredibly sorry, Faith, she said softly. You deserve so much better than this. Faith smiled at Robin, a genuine smile that conveyed gratitude for the support in such a difficult moment. Thank you, Robin. You've always been kind. The contrast between Robin's warmth and Sam's cruelty couldn't have been more stark. Sam made one last desperate attempt to regain control of the narrative. This is ridiculous, he said, his voice cracking slightly. I'm just trying to have an honest conversation, and suddenly, I'm the bad guy? This is exactly what's wrong with society today. Everyone's too sensitive. Nobody can handle the truth anymore. His words sounded hollow, a tired defense that convinced no one, least of all himself. Faith shook her head slowly, a look of something almost like pity crossing her face. The truth, Sam. The truth is that you used your position to try to humiliate me. The truth is that you thought you could get away with it because you're on television and I'm just a guest. The truth is that you were wrong. Each statement landed with precision, cutting through Sam's defensive posturing like a hot knife through butter. George moved closer to Faith, his voice gentle. Faith, please know that this network values you and respects you. What happened here today is unacceptable, and we will be addressing it. His words were professional, measured, but carried an underlying message that Sam's behavior would have consequences. Sam heard it too, and for the first time, genuine fear flickered across his face. But Faith was already done with the conversation. She had said everything she needed to say, had stood up for herself in the face of outrageous disrespect, and now she was ready to leave with her head held high. "I appreciate that, George," she said quietly. "But right now, I just need to go." She turned and walked toward the exit, her steps steady and sure, not hurried or panicked, but deliberate and dignified. Robin called after her, "Faith, wait." But Faith just raised her hand in a small wave, not turning back. The gesture was final, a clear indication that she had made her decision, and nothing was going to change her mind. The studio fell silent again as Faith disappeared through the door that led backstage, leaving behind a set full of shocked faces and a host who had just destroyed his own credibility in a matter of minutes. Sam stood alone now, isolated by his own actions. George and Robin both turned to look at him, their expressions a mixture of anger and disappointment. George spoke first, his voice cold and professional. "Sam, I think you should go to your dressing room. Now." It wasn't a suggestion. It was an order. Sam opened his mouth as if to argue, but something in George's expression made him think better of it. He stalked off the set, his movements stiff and defensive, still unwilling or unable to acknowledge what he had done. Robin turned to face the camera, her professional mask firmly back in place despite the obvious emotion in her eyes. "We're going to take a quick break," she said, her voice slightly shaky, but still strong. "When we come back, we'll be talking about the latest developments in renewable energy." The camera cut away, and the studio erupted into chaos as producers rushed forward, crew members whispered among themselves, and everyone tried to process what had just happened. Backstage, Faith Hill was already gathering her things, her team surrounding her with support and concern. Her manager was on the phone, no doubt already fielding calls from media outlets eager to get the story. Faith's publicist was pacing, trying to figure out how to spin what had just become a major news event. But Faith herself seemed calm, almost relieved, as if standing up to Sam had lifted a weight from her shoulders. One of the makeup artists approached Faith tentatively. "Are you okay?" she asked softly. Faith nodded, managing a small smile. "I'm fine," she said. "Actually, I feel better than I have in a long time. Sometimes you just have to draw a line in the sand and say, enough is enough." The makeup artist squeezed her shoulder sympathetically. "What he said to you was horrible. Everyone backstage is on your side." Meanwhile, back on the set, producers were having heated conversations about how to handle the situation. The segment had been live, so there was no way to undo what had happened. Social media was already exploding with reactions. Hashtags were trending, and the video clip was being shared thousands of times per minute. Sam had created a crisis, and everyone knew it. George and Robin stood together, speaking in low voices, their faces serious as they discussed what needed to happen next. In his dressing room, Sam paced back and forth, still convinced that he had done nothing wrong. He pulled out his phone and saw the flood of notifications, the overwhelming tide of negative reactions to his behavior. But instead of reflecting on his actions, he grew defensive, tweeting out justifications and doubling down on his position. "Just ask the tough questions everyone wants answers to," he wrote. "If that makes me the bad guy, so be it." The tweet only made things worse, confirming to everyone watching that he fundamentally didn't understand what he had done wrong. Back in the studio, a producer approached George and Robin. "We need to address this when we come back on air," she said urgently. "We can't just pretend it didn't happen." George nodded grimly. "I know. We'll make a statement." Robin added, "And it needs to be clear that Faith was absolutely in the right. What Sam did was inexcusable." The producer agreed, already typing notes on her tablet about how to frame the message. When the show returned from commercial break, George and Robin sat alone at the desk, their expressions somber. George spoke first, looking directly into the camera with the kind of sincerity that could not be faked. Before we continue with our scheduled programming, we need to address what just happened. Our guest, Faith Hill, was subjected to questioning that was completely inappropriate and unprofessional. We want to apologize to Faith and to our viewers for what you just witnessed. Robin continued, her voice strong and clear. Faith Hill is an incredibly talented artist and a gracious person who came here expecting a respectful conversation about her music. Instead, she was attacked in a way that no guest should ever be treated on this program. We stand with Faith, and we want to be clear that the opinions and behavior you saw do not represent the values of Good Morning America or ABC News. The statement was powerful, unequivocal, and left no doubt about where the network stood. But the damage had been done. The interview that was supposed to promote Faith's music had instead become a viral moment for all the wrong reasons. Faith Hill had walked off the set of Good Morning America, and the entire country had watched it happen in real time. In the green room, Faith's team had finished packing up her belongings. Faith herself stood near the exit, ready to leave the building and put this entire experience behind her. A young production assistant approached her nervously. "Miss Hill, I just wanted to say that you handled that with such grace. What you said up there, it really resonated with me. Thank you for standing up for yourself." Faith smiled warmly at the young woman. "Thank you, sweetheart. Don't ever let anyone make you feel small. You're worth more than that." As Faith walked through the backstage corridors toward the exit, more and more staff members stopped what they were doing to applaud her. Camera operators, sound technicians, hair and makeup artists, all of them showing their support for someone who had been treated so poorly. Faith waved and smiled, touched by the outpouring of solidarity from people she had never met before. It was a reminder that for every Sam champion in the world, there were dozens of good, decent people who understood right from wrong. Outside the studio, a small crowd had already gathered, having heard about what happened through social media. When Faith emerged from the building, they erupted in cheers and applause. "We love you, Faith!" someone shouted. "You're beautiful!" called another voice. Faith stopped for a moment, taking in the unexpected support from complete strangers, and her eyes welled up with tears. Not tears of sadness or shame, but tears of gratitude and vindication. She had stood up for herself, and people had seen it and responded. Inside the studio, Sam Champion sat alone in his dressing room, staring at his phone as the negative reactions continued to pour in. His Twitter mentions were a flood of criticism. His Instagram comments had turned hostile, and even his colleagues were distancing themselves from him. The realization was slowly dawning that he had made a catastrophic mistake, that his attempt to create a provocative moment had instead revealed something ugly about himself that the public would not soon forget. George knocked on Sam's dressing room door, not waiting for an answer before entering. His expression was stern, the disappointment evident in every line of his face. "We need to talk," George said simply. Sam looked up, and for the first time, the smugness was completely gone, replaced by something that looked like panic. "George, I was just trying to," he began, but George held up a hand to stop him. "Save it, Sam. We'll discuss this in the executive offices. Now." As Sam followed George down the hallway, crew members stepped aside, their faces reflecting a mixture of judgment and disgust. Nobody made eye contact with him. Nobody offered words of support. He had burned every bridge in a single interview, and now he was facing the consequences alone. The walk to the executive offices felt like a death march, each step taking him closer to a reckoning he could no longer avoid. Meanwhile, Faith Hill's car pulled away from the ABC studios, leaving behind the chaos and controversy. She looked out the window at the New York City streets, processing everything that had just happened. Her phone was buzzing constantly, with messages of support from friends, family, and fellow artists. Her manager sat beside her, already strategizing about how to handle the media firestorm. But Faith just wanted a moment of quiet to collect her thoughts. "You did the right thing," her manager said softly. Walking away with dignity was the perfect response. Faith nodded, a small smile playing at her lips. "I've spent my whole career trying to be accommodating, trying to be the perfect guest, the perfect interview. But there has to be a line somewhere. Today, Sam crossed it, and I wasn't going to let him get away with it." Her voice was calm, but underneath there was steel, a determination that came from years of navigating an industry that often tried to diminish and control women. Back at the studio, the executive meeting was brief and brutal. Sam tried to defend his actions, tried to explain his perspective, but every word he spoke only dug his hole deeper. The executives were clear. What he had done was a liability to the network, a violation of every standard of professional conduct, and most importantly, it was simply cruel. By the time Sam left that office, his future at Good Morning America was already in serious doubt. The story spread like wildfire across every media platform. News websites ran headlines about the confrontation. Entertainment shows dedicated entire segments to analyzing what had gone wrong. Social media users created memes, wrote think pieces, and shared their own stories of being body shamed by people in positions of power. Faith Hill had inadvertently sparked a much larger conversation about respect, decency, and the treatment of women in the entertainment industry. Other celebrities began speaking out in support of Faith. Fellow country artists tweeted messages of solidarity. Pop stars shared the video with comments praising Faith's strength. Even people outside the entertainment industry weighed in, recognizing that this was about more than just one interview, more than just one rude host. It was about standing up to bullying, about refusing to accept disrespect, about recognizing your own worth even when others try to tear you down. As the day wore on, Sam Champion's social media presence began to crumble. His follower count dropped by the thousands. Brands that had partnerships with him started quietly distancing themselves. The network received calls from sponsors expressing concern about being associated with someone who had behaved so poorly. The business implications of his actions were becoming impossible to ignore. Faith, meanwhile, received an overwhelming flood of support. Her social media accounts gained hundreds of thousands of new followers. Her music sales spiked as people who had never listened to her before decided they wanted to support an artist who had shown such grace under pressure. The tour she had come to promote was suddenly selling out faster than her team could have imagined. In trying to tear her down, Sam had inadvertently elevated her to new heights. That evening, Faith sat in her hotel room, finally able to relax after the chaos of the day. She ordered room service, changed into comfortable clothes, and turned on the television to see how the story was being covered. Every channel seemed to be talking about it, showing clips of the confrontation, bringing on experts to analyze what had happened. But rather than feeling embarrassed or ashamed, Faith felt proud. She had stood her ground, had refused to be diminished, and had walked away with her dignity intact. Her phone rang, and she saw it was Robin Roberts calling. Faith answered, and Robin's warm voice came through immediately. "Faith, I just wanted to call personally and tell you how sorry I am about what happened. What Sam did was inexcusable, and I want you to know that George and I fought for you in that moment, and will continue to do so." Faith's voice was soft, but sincere, when she replied, "Thank you, Robin. Your support meant everything to me. You and George are the reason I didn't completely lose it." Robin continued, "I also want you to know that we would love to have you back on the show whenever you're ready to talk about your music the way we should have today. No ambushes, no inappropriate questions, just a real conversation about your artistry and your career." Faith considered the offer for a moment. "I appreciate that, Robin. Let me think about it. Right now, I just need a little time to process everything." The two women talked for a few more minutes, finding common ground in their shared experience of navigating an industry that often tried to control and diminish women. When they hung up, Faith felt a sense of peace. She had handled a terrible situation with grace and strength, and the world had seen it. More importantly, she had shown herself that she didn't have to accept disrespect from anyone, regardless of their position or platform. As night fell over New York City, the full impact of the day's events was still unfolding. Think pieces were being written, hot takes were being shared, and debates were raging about accountability, respect, and the power dynamics in media. But at the center of it all was a simple truth. Faith Hill had been treated poorly, had stood up for herself, and had walked away with her head held high. And in doing so, she had reminded everyone watching that dignity cannot be taken from you. It can only be given away. And Faith Hill was not giving hers away to anyone.